blockchain is going to offer and will offer is this ability where, especially for independent musicians, if you own all of your intellectual property and you build up your online following through TikTok and Twitter and all those things, and you've got millions of views, now you're able to distribute a song and collect the bulk of that money. Yeah. I think the changing point here really for songs on chain is this ability for artists to get paid, depending on the accounting practices of the streaming platforms, potentially every 2 weeks or more likely once a month.
Really?
Yeah, thank you. I can't believe it, because I've been on this small 2 hot, salty rocks in the middle of nowhere for 2 years. And I think this has kind of taken me by surprise. Suddenly everybody knows about us. When I first started this journey, educating everybody about crypto 2 years ago, most people didn't know about it. And now suddenly it's become the big thing. And that's what it's amazing. Here we are in Vegas, and it's the start of a lot of the crypto stuff. Yeah, can you believe this? Real Vision takes over Vegas. Who'd have thought that? We started in a small office of 3 people in Grand Cayman, and now we're here. But this whole thing is that journey. What's amazing, what this is going to be about these next couple of days, is about, we kind of all know that financial system that we all live in was broken, and it was depressing, and it's still depressing now. It's all about inflation and how the Fed have screwed up and all of this. And suddenly exploded out of the last 2 years was this new world that started for many people in a journey of Bitcoin, and suddenly it's become a journey of, oh my God, all of money, all of value is about to be digitized and tokenized, and everything is changing, and this is the biggest opportunity any of us have ever seen. And it's not going to be a smooth path. Whatever we think it is, it's not going to be that. But all I do know is over time it's going from here to somewhere exponentially over there. And that's an incredible thing. It just feels like, for once, we're in control of this. And we don't know how, as I said, we don't know how it's going to get there, but we know for all of us there's some optimism. And it's nice to be in a world with optimism. It's not been a very optimistic world, but this is an optimistic world. And that's why I'm really looking forward to speaking to my first guest, which is Bill Tai, because Bill shares that sense of optimism with me. He also, I just been backstage with him now. He's got a big grin on his face like I have, because we know magic is happening. So let's welcome Bill. This really, Ellie. So for people who don't know, explain a little bit about NFTs, because you were there with CryptoKitties in the beginning, and you saw the potential before, and everyone was laughing at you. They're like, Bill, what are you talking about?
Yeah, so I maybe a little bit more of my background. I'm originally a chip designer, so I learned to design computer chips and came out to Silicon Valley in '83, '84, joined the CEO of Fairchild Semiconductor. And if you don't know that company, that was kind of the mothership that had spin-outs like Intel and AMD and National, and one of the later CEOs started a company called LSI Logic, and I joined him. So I did a lot of hardware, like, real men stuff, like chips and routers and switches and hubs, and I started an ISP. There are a few people here that live that era. Yeah. There's value in all kinds of things, whether it's physical stuff, monetary units, or, social good karma, right? Everybody has kind of a reputation and good karma that they've built up. And I happen to believe that karma is one of those things that's accretive, as are economies. Right, so if you take a bunch of economies like Canada, Mexico, USA, if the USA is going hot, Mexico and Canada are going to do well, right? So they're all kind of together. And so this company, MetaGood, born of the Hanu Kitty, we launched an NFT collection called On-Chain Monkey. And it was technically very brilliant too. The guy that wrote the first thing, he's our CEO, Danny Yang, He was the guy running the Stanford Bitcoin meetup groups who introduced me to Vitalik. You know, Danny's a PhD computer scientist from Stanford, and he took the entire 10,000 collection of on-chain monkeys, turned it into an algorithm with the variables and an SVG, as a scalable vector graphics file, in one 4K formula, and stuck it on one block. So all of the on-chain monkeys were done in one the entire collection was done in one transaction. So, you know, think about the gas fees to try to do 9,500 things. He did it with one little print, you know, and so it's been a very interesting thing, because as those things trade, they're mostly on OpenSea today. We're going to do our own chain later, our own marketplace. But the OpenSea commission, a chunk of that goes into this foundation, MetaGood Foundation, and over time we're going to have a currency and a DAO. So if you own an on-chain monkey, we have this beautiful community now where we have universal basic bananas, you know. So. And bananas, you know, they rot over time, so you got to give them away. So every 8 hours, if you go into the Discord, you type in rise, you're issued a bunch of bananas, and then people inside the group that are doing good things, you give them bananas. So the people that are really good community members, they're earning a lot of bananas. And so you get wealthier by doing good stuff.
But what do you do with those bananas?
You can trade them in for an on-chain monkey hat. Like, you know, there's
right,
goods.
Okay.
There's a second version of the OCM, with the OCM for Unchained Monkey. There's the next edition's called OCM Karma. And there was a Disney animator that bought one of our monkeys and then totally like dressed it up, like totally like made it look really cool, posted it, and then a lot of other people that had monkeys started asking him on Twitter if they could pay to get theirs done like that. And so we hired him. You know, so now we've got this collection coming out, and if you get 100 bananas, then you move up in the line to the first release, because we can only do so many of those, a little bit higher touch. So there's a date by which, if you are a good citizen, you get them a little bit sooner. You know, but there's all kinds of ways to incentivize good behavior, and ultimately, you know, you guys probably hear about distributed autonomous organizations, DAOs, whatever. So think about taking, like, you know, currency like that, bananas that represent good karma, having them tokenized, and then having very free-form communities able to rise up and just ask people, will you support this or not? You know, so you could just have these like free-form groups.
But what is the hard thing is understanding of how a monkey JPEG and a bunch of people who've also got monkey JPEGs are now going to go and change the world because you're giving them bananas.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Isn't that
right,
cool?
This is what nobody understands this,
so
Bill.
Cool.
Nobody understands this, and I get this a lot. You know, it's the same with some of these others, whether it's Friends with Benefits or others. They have this community, a sense of purpose, and everyone's like,
yeah,
but if you give them a DAO and this kind of random group of people, how do you know they're just not going to go and create nuclear warfare or something? You don't.
Well, you know, I think hopefully
because humans aren't generally. You know.
They can be chaotic, yeah. But I think, you know, you also want startups, communities, whatever, you know, groups, you have to try to set a culture and have behavioral norms. And if you reinforce those, hopefully you bring out the good in people. You know,
where any of these communities are going, you've got a clear idea of what yours is doing. Many of the others don't. Bored Ape Yacht Club, they're striking commercial deals. CryptoPunks you're not allowed to because you don't actually own the image rights.
Right.
Which is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think if we look forward in 3 or 4 years' time, what NFTs are being used for?
I think we're at the intersection. There's some outside forces that are going to absorb this technology and really make use of it around the creator economy. So if you think about media in general, and think about, I'll use music as an example. There's many different kinds of media, of course, but think about the function of music or songs over the course of human history of, say, and people argue about how long have humans been around, but if it's like 400,000 years or something, for like 90% of that period, songs were something you sang to each other, you know, and you couldn't really monetize them. But when vinyl got invented, suddenly, it became capital intensive, right? So now you could print them on something, and you could distribute them. So if you controlled the production and distribution, you could monetize. So he who controlled capital in a centralized way became king. And now software is coming, or software is already here, that has deconstructed the production and distribution to cause.
Good morning. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
Fabian,
morning, everyone.
everyone. So Fabian, let's start out talking about your journey. You've had an incredibly interesting journey in this space. Tell us about it.
Sure. I've been involved in the music industry since I was a kid, as a musician, artist manager, concert producer, running record companies, running management companies, booking agencies. Basically, I've done everything under the sun around the space of music. And a good 5 years ago, I started buying Bitcoin and Ethereum and started making money from it and started to wonder what on earth is happening here and what is this? And I threw myself into it and read everything I can get my hands on regarding the space and what the technology was able to do. And wrote out a pretty lengthy business plan for what I thought the future of music festivals would look like around digital identity, digital wallets, embedding information into video clips and music and allowing for financial distribution of royalties off of that. And started to shop around to see if I can get the funding for it. And a company at the time that found me called Archain. And the CEO of Archain received the information. He said, none of this exists. You want to come on board and help us build it? I said, absolutely. So I joined Archain, spent a good 2 years working with them. We built out the beginnings of a platform called RSong, which would have allowed for royalty distributions on-chain and putting songs on-chain. And we had a good run over at Archain. And while I was there, the people over at BitFury Surround heard about me. And we had a couple of meetings. They came over from Germany to meet up with me in Los Angeles. And they made me a good offer. And I segued over there. And for the last 2 years, I've been with them now. We've been building out an asset management and commerce platform for music intellectual property, which basically translates in the history of a copyright. If anyone knows the process of writing a song, I'll sit at my piano, I'll write a song, I own 100% of that IP. You'll come along and say, hey man, I've got some lyrics for it. We'll say, all right, cool, here's the lyrics. We record another version of the song. We can say, all right, we're gonna split the song 50-50. So all the way up to the finalized master, someone might add a drum beat or a guitar part or whatever the case may be, and we can identify what those splits are, embed that into the song, allow for that song to be distributed, and then allow for the royalties of those songs to be distributed into a digital wallet once monies are distributed from the DSPs. So that's what we're working on in that platform. We'll launch next year.
Great. So first question, can everyone hear me now with the new microphone? Excellent. So you mentioned BitFury and BitFury Surround. Tell us a little bit about the context for that. I think most people know BitFury as a mining company. They also have software interests. They do hardware. Give us a little sense of the relationship between BitFury and BitFury Surround.
Sure. The BitFury group invested in a fine gentleman named Stefan Schultz, who's the CEO of BitFury Surround. Stefan comes from Universal in the music industry, and the core of the team lives in Germany. I'm here in the United States representing the company. And the BitFury group put in the capital to get the company up and running.
So coming back to the earlier point about your relationship with music, you've obviously been involved in the music business for many years. Give us a sense of where the music business is today in 2021, and what's the experience like for musicians?
I think specific to where the technology is going for how artists will be paid in the future, everything is being built right now. There's a lot of promise of what the technology can offer. There's a lot of opportunity with how different technologies will be able to integrate between data, AI, virtual reality, the ability to be able to move a digital asset into multiple platforms, the eventuality of there being a platform agnostic asset that could move around, that could be monetized, existing in different arenas. So that's a lot of the stuff that we talk about and that we're looking at when we're seeing all these obviously new blockchains are popping up, VR environments in the metaverse, and thinking about where does the future of music, where is that actually going to go? Where can we see that I can play a song on Spotify? We'll see, we know how Spotify functions, but eventually that song will show up on Facebook Horizon. That song will eventually show up over in Decentraland. And there will be a point in time when those assets are built on chain and that the smart contract just kind of tags along. And the fingerprint on that song will allow us to see who's listening, when they're listening, how often they're listening, and the eventuality will be there that we will be able to identify our super fans and then be able to reward them with all the goods that blockchain has to offer.
So let's talk a little bit about the present of the music industry, where we are right now with streaming and what the challenges are that musicians and artists more specifically face in that environment.
I'd say presently in the music industry, we know that everyone's able to listen to music on Spotify, Apple, Deezer, on all the streaming platforms. The challenge is how regularly are musicians getting paid?
Right.
Are they getting paid fairly?
I mean, we hear these horror stories, right, about bands producing a song that gets 500,000 plays and they get a check for, $1.36.
Yeah, for fractions of a penny. Look, I came from the era of records and CDs and the ability to, sell a physical product and you get a lot of cash off of it.
Right.
But now with the space where artists have a global audience and a global reach, the revenue that is being generated from those listens, those millions to billions of listens, really doesn't add up fairly for the musicians.
Yeah, and what is it that musicians want, right? You've been uniquely positioned to see this as a musician and as someone who's now an executive in the industry. What is it that they want and how would they like to express that?
I think if you are an artist that's garnering millions of listens, you want to know that you can make a living.
Yeah.
And across the board, musicians are struggling to make a living. And in the arena where you spend hundreds of hours on a song, you write it, you talk about it, you produce it, you mix it, you master it, you create the artwork, you distribute it. And then you see you've got millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of listens, but you're getting paid fractions of a penny for it. And that fraction of a penny is then distributed to your record label, your publisher, your manager, the performing rights organizations. There's a lot of people along the food chain that are receiving a piece of that penny. Right. And I think what the blockchain is going to offer and will offer is this ability where, especially for independent musicians, if you own all of your intellectual property and you've built up your online following through TikTok and Twitter and all those things, and you've got millions of views, now you're able to distribute a song and collect the bulk of that money. Yeah. I think the changing point here really for songs on chain is this ability for artists to get paid, depending on the accounting practices of the streaming platforms, potentially every 2 weeks or more likely once a month.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, what will allow that to happen is, number one, for the streaming platforms to say, yes, we're willing to do that.
Right.
And there will be somebody within the big five that'll decide, hey, we're going to allow for this to happen. So independent musicians will be the first ones to benefit, and then eventually the Warners, Universals, and Sonys of the world will say, this is a good idea because our artists up at the top of the food chain are demanding for this as well. And once there's a technology platform, hopefully that will be BitFury Surround. Once that platform fully exists in the world and people can see the capabilities of this super app, it'll change the livelihood for musicians in the future. And that's just for royalties, because once you have a piece of IP, it's a song, it's a stem, it's a loop, it's lyrics, it's artwork, it's the animation of artwork, it's the NFTs, everything that falls under the umbrella of being a digital asset. Yeah. And then how does that digital asset play in the world? How is it monitored through fingerprinting? How is it then monitored and monetized? And how is that money then distributed back to the stakeholders of the song? And as this technology expands and as more and more young people have access to recording songs at home without the need of going to an expensive studio, without the need of having a Universal, Sony, or Warner behind them because they're able to build up their own online following, they can capitalize and take all of that money for themselves. And I think, in the United States, it's one very unique thing in that the youth, and most of us here, obviously, are all very into tech. The place that I'm really interested in seeing this take hold is really in quote-unquote developing countries. I want to see the young musicians in Pakistan or a band like Tanarawen out of Mali that live literally over in the middle of the Sahara to be able to receive their royalties into a phone. Most quote-unquote global musicians, they perform, they're waiting for a check to come from the United States, England, or France. More often than not, they don't receive the check, or it has to go through the old ways of Western Union. And I really love the idea that one day a bunch of Tuareg musicians in the middle of the Sahara can look at their phone and say, oh, I've gotten my royalties, and they can count on that to start showing up, and that they can count on their plays coming from, be it Australia or Japan or the United States, and all of that information harnessed into one space, and then the financial pipelines are there to be able to put it directly into their digital wallet. That's a game changer for musicians around the world, and there's millions, tens of millions of musicians that would benefit from that versus the way the structures are set up right now, which is waiting upon a handful of different entities to take their piece of the money before the money actually gets to the artist. And that process can take between 6 months to a year.
Yes. The answer is yes.
Setting new standards.
I love it. So what I would love to hear is a little bit of the backstory. We talked a little bit about this last night, but I always like to know where you grew up and what was your thing growing up?
Well, I had a lot of things. I was definitely an overachiever. I was the star child of my family. So I had a lot of hobbies in school. I grew up in Lakeland, Florida. It's a little town in between Tampa and Orlando. I went to the University of Florida, went to public schools, pretty much most of my life. And kind of the way that I got interested in crypto is I was studying economics in school during the historic financial collapse of, was it 2008 timeframe?
2008,
And Florida was pretty much the real estate bubble bursting, which was the global financial crisis at its peak. And everyone I knew was impacted by what was happening around me. People in my family, their homes went underwater, had to move. My parents lost a lot of their life savings in the stock market. And there wasn't anybody that I didn't know that wasn't impacted by what was going on. But yet I was very frustrated because in my econ, micro and macro classes, no one could really tell us like what was actually happening. We were like doing math problems, but yet there were these real life things happening. And so I was telling you this story last night, but my friends and I just decided to kind of take it upon ourselves to figure it out. Like what actually happened? How does the government work? What is the Federal Reserve? How does money work? What's happening between Washington and Wall Street? And how did we get to this point? And the things that I just learned as a young person, I really felt like it didn't emulate my values that I was brought up in my public school education. And I really wanted to just fight for something better, a more sustainable economic system. So I moved to DC. I've been working in economic policy ever since. Came across Bitcoin, this cryptocurrency that the governments can't manipulate. And I truly believe that this is something that is going to answer a lot of the major issues that's being debated today on the global stage. Look at this morning. What is the news of the day? We're at 40-year highs of inflation. Well, as you know, with Bitcoin, this is a deflationary system. So there's a lot of kind of interesting things that I promise.
So many amazing threads to pull in. So one thing, you're good at math, or maths, as people like to call it. And I think that's an interesting dynamic in that you studied economics, which sometimes the math doesn't foot in economics, and we just changed the thing. And now we got this new MMT nonsense that I think is creating some of the problems. But I think you bring up a really interesting point that it's probably not surprising to you, or probably many people in the audience, that the first item in the original Genesis block of Bitcoin was the picture of the chancellor bailing out the banks for the second time.
Chancellor on the brink of collapse, right?
Yeah. And so talk a little bit about that financial crisis and the timing of the creation of this real asset, this hard money asset, this deflationary asset. Think that was coincidence? Think it was not coincidence?
Yeah, so I would point everyone to some research that Dan Held has done. And if you don't follow Dan Held on Twitter, he's published this kind of graph for everyone to look at. But Bitcoin is really the accumulation of over 50 years of computer science. This wasn't something that was just whipped up because everybody was upset that the banks were getting bailed out in 2018. It really started at the beginning with Bob Kahn and Vince Cerf, the co-inventors of the internet. Was that in the early 70s, 60s?
Early 70s, yeah. And Vince Cerf, he created TCP/IP, literally invented the internet. Now, he's not a super rich guy because he couldn't own TCP/IP. And the guy who then took TCP/IP and turned it into the internet as we understand it today, not Al Gore, Tim Berners-Lee, wrote the first web page, 9,500 lines of code, built the internet. Now we have 1.7 billion web pages from that one in 1991. What I love about Tim Berners-Lee, not a rich guy either, he's doing fine, he's a professor at MIT, but he just turned that 9,500 lines of code into an NFT, and Sotheby's is going to auction it, and he's going to make a bunch of money. I want to own it so badly. And if I had just bought Bitcoin when the Winklevoss did, I could, but I can't, because Ken Griffin's probably going to buy it. But
But at least you're not Andrew Ross Sorkin, who's still bitter about it. He was one of the first people to interview the twins, and he's still a critic. At least you were able to.
Oh, he's still a critic.
Corner.
Yeah. I appreciate that. But the point there is this beginning of the internet. And if you haven't read the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto from 1988, you need to. It predicted everything that was going to happen the next 30 years. The problem is the first 20 years, from 88 to 2008, when Bitcoin was invented, the guy was an anarchist. And he sat up in the woods by himself, and nobody saw the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto, so no one did anything about it. So it wasn't until Satoshi, over he, she, they, are, came along. And you're not Satoshi, are you?
No.
Okay, good.
I'm not a developer or an engineer.
All right.
No, I do not even possess the right background for that at all. But yeah, I mean, this was not by happenstance. So you had the invention of the ARPANET, which became the internet.
Yep.
And then we went through several iterations of different cryptography. And then you had a lot of e-money, whether that was DigiCash or e-gold, and you had it in Liberty Reserve. And then eventually we got to Bitcoin. But there was a lot of learnings in computer science over decades that got us to where we are today. But really the original issue, and so you had Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn. So Bob Kahn is who hired Vint Cerf over at DARPA, and I brought him in to meet with our members several times just to talk about that whole experience. And he's written about this in length in a number of his books, but he's always said, like, what was missing in the internet when they were building the original infrastructure was the ability to transfer value.
Perfect.
So what we use the internet today is for communications. And of course, the first commercial application and use case was email. Just send a simple message, peer-to-peer. You don't really need to use like an intermediary like the Postal Service to deliver it globally, instantly, for basically very little cost or nothing at all. But you can't do that with something of value. And that is what was missing in the architecture of the internet itself. And even Mark Andreessen, the co-founder of Netscape, one of the very first web browsers, had said, if we knew what this was at the time we were building Netscape, we would have built this into that architecture. We just didn't know, we didn't know how to do it, and we didn't know what it was, but this was always missing. And that's why you've brought in all these third-party intermediaries to facilitate commerce over the internet. And of course, that has led to all sorts of other architectural challenges and issues. But this really is a leap in computer science, and it also addresses some of the biggest issues in the macro financial and monetary systems today as well.
I mean, so elegantly summarized in pulling the chain, right? We talked about it in the last part of the chain, in that this idea of information being bidirectional, transitioning to value being bidirectional, and to your point, really disrupting all of it. And I think that disruption leads us to the point that I want to get the next link of the chain to set you up for the final link, which is regulation.
Oh, the policy, yeah.
And the policy. So you live in the middle of
the dragon's den.
The dragon's den, or New Rome, as I like to call it.
Swamp, yeah.
And remember, all empires fall, by the way. So Roman Empire, Ottoman Empire, British Empire, American Empire.
That is true.
And they all fall for the same reason. They all fall by getting too far in debt and then debauching the currency.
Base their currency.
And that's how it works. So why are we seeing this sudden shift in policy around crypto?
By sudden shift, what do you mean?
Meaning, if you look at Jay Clayton, SEC, he was measured, he was reasonable, he was consistent, like not words I would normally associate with the SEC, and they actually made a series of, I think, proper decisions about Ethereum, about Bitcoin, and there was a lot of development. Now I get the new guy who happens to be a bankster, ex-bankster, I guess you're always a bankster, and he's talking a little differently about regulation, and he hasn't said the outright ban word, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting analysis. So I was at an event last week where the former chairman of the SEC, Jay Clayton, and the current chairman, Gary Gensler, did a fireside chat together.
Oh, wow, I wish I was there.
And it was fascinating. And they kind of went back and forth on a couple of different things. And Jay had asked, for the lack of proper titles, Jay was asking Gary, hey, we've got a lot of it, like kind of crazy, weird stuff going on. Like, how are you addressing some of the illicit, scary things like ransomware? And
we have a really great topic today to talk about, which is really about how crypto is affecting the video games industry overall. Certainly over the last 18 months, it's entered the zeitgeist, I think, of most people around the world. And so through this discussion, I hope to be able to illuminate with our panelists here, is this the future of video games, or is this really just going to be another flavor of the month hype situation for the video games industry? So why don't we go ahead and start off with you, Piers. I mean, you famously, back in March, had a real great conversation with Raoul regarding the Metaverse. Why don't you go ahead and just explain a little bit about what the Metaverse is and if your thinking has changed over the last 9 months?
Sure. So yeah, when we speak about the metaverse, I sort of like to define it as this sort of next perceived sort of successor to the internet. I do have a definition that I usually use, which is a persistent, live digital universe that affords individuals a sense of agency, social presence, and shared spatial awareness, along with the ability to participate in an extensive virtual economy with societal impact. I know it's a lot, but we'll sort of unpack it a bit, hopefully, through the panel here. I think it's also important to sort of make the distinction between the sort of open versus closed metaverse that's now emerging. Obviously, many of the big tech companies, Facebook perhaps most notably rebranding to Meta lately, are sort of making big bets on this sector. But there's also the sort of more grassroots, decentralized version that's being built right on top of these permissionless networks, sort of smart contracting platforms like Ethereum. And so, yeah, I mean, I spend most of my time focused on the sort of open metaverse, right, where people are sort of building on this decentralized infrastructure, leveraging primitives like NFTs to sort of build new experiences and functionality around this whole ecosystem. So obviously, we've seen some breakout cases with early games such as ACTAI Infinity by Sky Mavis. I'm sure most of you have heard of that by now, but they're sort of, at something like $40 billion fully diluted sort of network valuation. There's just under 3 million daily active players in the Philippines, sort of, using this game economy effectively as a sort of primary source of income now. That's an example, that's an early manifestation of what this sort of open metaverse can look like.
All right. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many of you here, especially for 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning in Vegas. So we've got our coffee. Hopefully you do too. This is I think, one of the most fascinating topics and really areas emerging within crypto on this intersection of music and Web3. And there really are no two better people that I would rather have this conversation with to walk us through and let us, understand how this is evolving and what the future of music looks like than Jack and Andre. So before we get into the meat of this conversation, I think it'd be great, Jack, if you could, and then Andre, you as well, if you could just give us a quick background on yourself and how you kind of came into crypto. What was your journey into crypto?
Yeah, so I started managing artists when I was in college, and it's kind of naive at the time, but I was obsessed with this idea of owning a share of an artist as you help them grow. Namely, I helped some artists from having under 1,000 followers on SoundCloud go to over 100,000 followers within a very short few months. And it was this kind of 100x multiple that was like, there's really nothing in it for fans or close team support for like emerging artists outside of like traditional management or copyright structures. And long story short, I was not in the music business. I didn't want to be in the music business. I was just helping manage artists. And I was into like this idea of Bitcoin being this potential social good. I have a liberal arts degree, for better or for worse, and they teach you all about the inequities of the world, but they don't really teach you any solutions. So at the time, like Bitcoin was dominating medium.com, and I got really into that. And one of the topics they were talking about was music, and it was really the only industry I had experience in. So I was looking at that, and I kind of jumped ahead. Ethereum came out, and I was really into the idea of smart contract platforms for music licensing, for music rights information. This idea of smart contracts dividing royalties, payments at the transaction level is a very intuitively understood concept. This was also at the same time that Spotify was being ridiculed pretty widely for its royalty rates. Like Adele and Taylor Swift, I think at this time, like didn't even have their catalogs on Spotify. So I was really into the idea of using Ethereum for this, but there was this complete lack of infrastructure around that. How do you describe intellectual property using smart contracts? So I worked with an engineer, and we developed a schema to describe music copyright so that it could be content addressable and individually addressable in smart contracts so that you can isolate something like a music composition from a recording for different purposes of licensing. That led me to Consensus, where in 2017 I officially joined to bring that into a project that they had been working on for a few years at that point called Ujo Music. Ujo Music happened to be the first project that used smart contracts to divide royalty payments with the artist Imogen Heap. It's the first example of smart contracts ever doing anything for music. And we released the Ujo Music portal. That was actually after we had developed a proof of concept to show what that could look like with the artist RAC. In 2017, we released his album. We also we issued a token as a proof of purchase with that album. So there's 140 or so ego tokens on the Ethereum blockchain that predated the NFT specification that now exists. So we like to say that that was like the original music NFT. After a few years working on that, going through the bear market at Consensus largely changing kind of its model from the hub and spoke, having portfolio companies like Ujo, we wound down the project. And in 2020, I ended up leaving Consensus. I collaborated with an artist, RAC, on a project called Tape, which was pretty exciting, and introduced this idea of unit economics around music and dynamic pricing for price discovery using bonding curves and redeeming the actual token for physical merch. And then right after that, DeFi took off and subsequently NFTs. And ever since, I've been helping artists at a company called HiFi Labs, where now I get to explore kind of how an artist can be their own platform using this open technology.
That's perfect. And a great setup for our other esteemed guest, Andre, RAC here. Andre, if you wouldn't mind just giving us, again, a quick background on yourself and more so your journey into crypto.
Hi everyone. Andre here. So I'm getting a little bit of feedback, by the way, in my ears. But I'm calling from Portland, Oregon. It's very rainy right now. So I'm kind of a little bit jealous that you guys are hanging out in Vegas. My journey with is it really my journey into crypto sort of became after doing music for a very long time. I've sort of been working professionally since 2007, first through remixing, through film and TV. I've released original work through major labels, indie labels. The point I'm trying to make is that I've kind of done a lot in the music industry, and that sort of gave me a first-hand, impression of like how broken some of these systems can be, and we can get into that a little bit later. But due to that, I became sort of obsessed with potentially solving some of these issues, if not just for myself, but for my fellow artists and for other people that sort of deal with the same stuff. So, my crypto journey began a little bit later than most, I think. Well, it's funny because now it seems so early, but this was late 2016. I stumbled on videos of Vitalik Buterin talking about Ethereum, and I became obsessed. And I thought this idea of a distributed network, a distributed computing network, to be fascinating, could solve a lot of potential issues of shared sort of data infrastructure in the music industry. And there's a lot of layers to it that I think, again, do later. But I just became obsessed with this problem, basically. And that's when I reached out to Ujo and Jack and Jesse and the whole team over there. And, we ended up releasing my album at the time through Ethereum, becoming, I think, the first. There's a lot of firsts. I think the first album on Ethereum and the first, what we call like a pre-NFT maybe. But anyway, became super obsessed with it, sort of rode the wave up and down and up again. And, became obsessed with DeFi, with NFTs, started doing some NFT projects. I mean, Jack already mentioned the tape token, which at one point in time was the most expensive cassette tape of all time, beating Prince. So it's kind of a funny thing when you add, a market to a physical good instead of just like assigning a price to it. I think it's an interesting idea. So we had a $13,000 cassette tape in 2020, which was very amusing to me. But from there, became kind of obsessed with NFTs as a medium of expression, and I collaborated with various visual artists and broke a couple records, and just recently had within a year of doing this, ended up in the Christie's evening sale. It's a very prestigious thing, where me and some friends, we sold a piece in the 21st century evening sale. So it's like, going from, doing a small experiment on Ethereum to literally the largest market or largest art sale evening. It was kind of a crazy ride. So, there's so much has changed in the past year. So I'm very eager to sort of get into it, but that's sort of my brief introduction to this space.
That's great. Appreciate that. And the three of us talking before this, there were a couple different ways we could have taken this conversation, right? We could spend probably 2 hours talking about all of the legacy issues and all the things that are broken with the legacy system within the music industry, which I certainly think we need to kind of lay the groundwork for. But I do want to focus a lot of this conversation on what new types of, whether it's business models for artists or new types of ways in which you can create directly, create these connections between artists and fans that you previously couldn't have done, right? Really what Web3 unlocks for music artists, which I want to get into. But taking a step back really quickly, when we think about bye-bye music middlemen, right? Jack, who are these mysterious middlemen that we're talking about when it comes to the music industry?
Yeah, so I'll just preface this whole talk with the moment of NFT, but it's a site that anyone can go and drop a link to, like a Spotify link, a YouTube link, or SoundCloud or whatever. And you drop this link in, and everyone that's on this site is given 100 tokens. They're purely reputational. They're not NFTs per se, but they exist in your wallet. So posting a link is going to cost 1 token. So, okay, you put 1 token up. So then I go to this site, let's say, and then I just sort from least likes or least amount of tokens accrued to them. And I say, I'm going to search for music. And the incentive for me is to throw a token at it as well. So over time, basically, you're just organically liking music to chart it. But what the result is a pool of a bunch of tokens on a given song in the form of likes. So if anyone ever remembers Hype Machine, it's akin to that, but a little bit different. But the idea then is that like after a week or some sort of rolling fixed time frame, the tokens are distributed on a reverse distribution curve. So if I posted the song, it cost me my 1 token, my 1 like, but I stand to gain the most on an axis left to right. You can imagine the distribution going like this, where I put in 1, and now all the token accrual will value up towards this way, all the way down to the last person that voted for it may only get a decimal of what they put in. So there is some sort of like, probably rough edges around that idea where you may not be incentivized to like something if it's already been charting and it's high up and it's been there for a week, but this idea of like really incentivizing this organic curation to let this cream rise to the top kind of would bring some meritocracy back to how people value music and really ramp up discovery at scale. So that's a very like one-dimensional idea, but if you extrapolate that outwards, those tokens effectively become curation scores, and it's a form of reputation. And they don't belong to this application that provides this chart interface, but rather you can take them with you around the web, and then you could become a known curator. And that's kind of a valuable thing with music. It not only shows the proximity to, finding an artist early on, but it also shows that, you're a tastemaker and, that kind of could be bestowed on you. And the result of that, for the people that have absolutely no interest in going and sifting through music, is charts, curated music, for the people that don't want to do that. So it's kind of a twofold outcome there that I think is yet to be tapped into, but the idea of token curation mechanisms are quite popular, and when you apply them to music, there's no shortage of great ideas.